In a 6-year study of nearly 11,000 adults over 65, the group with the strongest cognitive health signal, 67% stronger than the comparison group, were not skilled cooks. They were beginners who simply showed up to cook once a week. The mechanism researchers identified explains why skill level barely matters. A March 2026 study published in the Journal of Epidemiology and Community Health tracked the cognitive health of 10,978 adults aged 65 and older for 6 years, and the finding that stood out was not about superfoods, supplements, or intense mental training. It was about something far simpler. Today you will see exactly what the researchers observed, why novice cooks showed the strongest pattern of all, and what 3 mechanisms the team believes are driving this effect. Stay to the end, because the most surprising part is saved for last. The research came from Yukiko Tani, PhD, at the Institute of Science Tokyo, and her team drew on the Japan Gerontological Evaluation Study, one of the largest population-based aging cohorts in the world. 10,978 participants, all aged at least 65 at the start, had their cognitive health tracked from 2016 to 2022. Dementia cases were confirmed through Japan's public long-term care insurance registry, which captures functionally significant impairment, not just a questionnaire score. By the end of those 6 years, 1,195 people in the study had received a dementia diagnosis through that registry, a cumulative incidence of around 11%. That is the baseline. Now here is what separated the people whose cognitive outcomes looked different. The researchers asked a simple question at the start: how often do you cook from scratch at home? The answer turned out to matter more than almost anyone expected. So what did high-frequency cooking actually look like in this study, and what was the threshold that made the difference? The threshold was lower than you might think. High cooking frequency in this study was defined as cooking from scratch at home at least once a week. Low frequency meant less than once a week. That single dividing line produced a striking difference in observed outcomes. Among men, cooking at least once a week was associated with a 23% stronger cognitive health signal compared with those who cooked less often. Among women, the figure was 27%. These associations held after researchers statistically adjusted for lifestyle factors, household income, years of education, and participation in other cognitively stimulating activities like crafting, volunteering, and gardening. In other words, cooking carried its own observable signal, independent of the other healthy behaviors that often cluster together. The lead researcher, Dr. Tani, described home cooking as a potentially simple and sustainable lifestyle behavior that may contribute to maintaining cognitive health. But that summary, accurate as it is, undersells the most counterintuitive part of the data. The group with the strongest association of all was not the experienced cooks. Here is the finding that stopped researchers mid-sentence. Among participants with few cooking skills, cooking from scratch at least once a week was associated with a 67% stronger cognitive health signal compared with low-skill participants who cooked rarely, 67%. For the most experienced, confident cooks in the study, cooking more frequently did not continue to drive that signal in the same way. Dr. Tani's explanation is direct. Cooking is a more cognitively novel and stimulating activity for novice cooks because it is genuinely unfamiliar territory for them. The brain response to novelty is well documented in neuroscience. When you face a task you have not fully automated, your prefrontal cortex, the planning and sequencing center, must actively engage. For an experienced cook, scrambling an egg is close to autopilot. For a novice, it is a small cognitive workout. This matters because it tells us something important about how the brain stays sharp, and it is not what most brain training advice focuses on. The study's authors identify 3 overlapping mechanisms that may explain why cooking from scratch carries a cognitive signal. First, cognitive load. Preparing a meal from scratch requires planning, sequencing, timing, and error correction, all in a single session. The researchers describe this as a cognitively complex series of tasks with multiple steps. Planning a menu, acquiring ingredients, managing heat, and plating on time activates working memory and executive functions simultaneously. Second, physical activity. Cooking is not sedentary. Chopping, stirring, standing at a counter, and moving between tasks contributes to the kind of light physical activity consistently linked in research to better brain blood flow. Third, nutrition. Home cooking generally involves more whole ingredients and far less of the saturated fat, sodium, and refined sugar that dominate restaurant and packaged food. The 2020 Lancet Commission report estimated that around 40% of dementia cases globally could be linked to modifiable lifestyle factors, including diet and physical activity. Cooking from scratch touches all three of those levers at once. But there is a fourth dimension the study raises that is easy to overlook. Cooking is rarely purely solitary. Researchers note that preparing a meal for oneself, for a partner, or for family carries a layer of social purpose that passive leisure activities simply do not. Purpose and social engagement are both independently linked in the literature with better cognitive aging outcomes. When you cook for someone, or even when you cook for yourself with care, you are making a small act of agency against the feeling that daily life has narrowed. That sense of purpose may matter as much as the planning and sequencing. Consider also that the study deliberately controlled for crafting, volunteering, and gardening, because those activities share some of the same cognitive texture. Home cooking held its signal even after those were removed from the equation. What this tells you is that it is not simply staying busy that matters. It is the specific combination of physical activity, cognitive demand, sensory engagement, and purposeful outcome that cooking delivers in one package. No app replicates that combination. The practical question is what this means if you have not cooked regularly in years. If you rely mostly on restaurants, takeaways, or packaged food right now, the data from this study points directly at you, and it does so with encouragement rather than alarm. The novice group showed the strongest observed association. That means the gap between where you are and where the signal appears is not large. One scratch meal a week, not 5, not every day. The bar is genuinely low, and the study's framing is clear. The cognitive signal comes not from culinary mastery, but from the act of engaging with a moderately complex task you have not fully automated. That is the mechanism. Dr. Lindsay Malone, a clinical dietitian and instructor at Case Western Reserve University, who commented on the findings, described cooking as a full brain-body activity, noting that the combination of cognitive tasks and physical coordination involved may explain the observed pattern. The practical implication is this: start with one simple scratch meal this week. Something you have not made before is better than something you know by heart. Novelty is the ingredient the research keeps pointing to most directly. Your number to track from today is 1. 1 from scratch meal per week. No single observational study closes the case. Dr. Susan Kohlhaas, Executive Director of Research and Partnerships at Alzheimer's Research UK, noted that this study suggests a possible link, but cannot establish that cooking directly causes any cognitive outcome. That is an important distinction, and this channel holds it. The researchers themselves flag that mild cases may not have appeared in the insurance registry, that the findings come from a Japanese cohort whose dietary patterns differ from Western eating, and that some low-skill cooks may have been cooking simple meals by choice, not limitation. Those are real caveats. What the study does establish is a statistically robust association in a well-controlled cohort of nearly 11,000 people, tracked over 6 years, with the effect holding independently of more than a dozen confounders. The direction of that signal, toward home cooking, toward novelty, toward purposeful physical activity, is consistent with what we know about how the brain maintains its cognitive reserve. Your number from today is 1 scratch meal a week. Write it down. Try something new. Aging is something you actively train, not something you passively wait on. Your one number from today is exactly that. One home-cooked scratch meal this week. Something unfamiliar, because novelty is the mechanism the research keeps pointing toward for maintaining your sharpest cognitive self. If you want the follow-up on 6 other weekly habits the evidence links to cognitive reserve after 65, it is linked right here, and subscribing means the next one comes straight to you.